Welcome to the Great White Brotherhood YouTube channel.
Hello again, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue on reading from the book The Path of Mankind. We're now on to chapter 4, The Way Towards Freedom. And this will also be a two-part video. So it's at some point I'll be breaking off this video and starting another one for part 2 of chapter 4. All right, let's go. We have talked at some length about how humanity and, indeed, the whole of life in this galaxy was, for a long time, under the control of a group of negative entities that are known of as archons, and how they successfully created a negative force that all were obliged to conform to. We also mentioned that change is the only constant. And so, this endless pendulum that swings back and forth is now propelling us into a period of positivity. I'm actually just going to touch on a very important term that they used in that sentence. Change is the only constant. Okay, I want everybody should think about that and keep that in the back of their mind. This period of positivity will last as long as the period of negativity lasted, before the pendulum starts once again to swing again towards negativity. But that's a long, long time into the so-called future. This is the way life functions, swinging endlessly back and forth between spiritual growth and decline. This swinging motion has been described as the breathing of God, drawing breath in and then expelling it again. This, obviously, is an analogy, using parts of life that people can understand in order to explain a somewhat difficult concept: the flow of life, spiritual life, rising and falling, creating a movement towards perfection, and moving eventually back towards chaos. We could, perhaps, consider why this should happen. If all life is on a path towards perfection, it would seem to be more logical just to move in a straight line from total ignorance about God to being at one with God itself. However, life does not work like that. If one examines the way life often operates on Earth, one observes in virtually all things that objects that we might describe as living objects, plants, animals of all descriptions, and humans, start off from, in a non physical sense, as fairly unsophisticated, grow to maximum maturity, and then decline back to the point, more or less, to where they started. It is this pendulum motion, the swing back and forth from infancy, in a mental sense, to maximum maturity, and then back towards infancy again, sometimes referred to as a second childhood. Once again, we observe this effect and have no knowledge as to why this should occur. It would be interesting to study this phenomenon and try to find out why it happens, for if it occurs with all life and over what is referred to as time, countless millennia, there must be a reason. The answer will be found in the concept of renewal of energy. Energy must be used to create anything, and if all life, in all its different elements of construction, were to travel in an endless straight line from creation to perfection, pretty soon the energy used to create everything would be consumed and life would run out of energy. Thus, we require this swing between birth to maturity, which consumes energy, to decline in which energy used is returned from whence it came, to provide the life force for the next generation of creation. In the case of living things, for everything is alive, we can readily observe its effect in the birth, growth, decline, and death of a creature or person. However, in vast amounts of time, it is rather more difficult to see. We can scarcely imagine hundreds of thousands of years, and we can certainly not actually observe the passage of such vast amount of time. Nevertheless, the passage of time follows this same course, and at one point in time, at one point in time, growth energy is used. Then the pendulum of time starts to swing back again, and that energy is returned to its source, rather like discharging and charging a battery. So let us try to predict which action uses energy and which action replaces energy when dealing with time and the actions of all life during any one of those two periods. To save you any doubts concerning these events, we will say that any negative action releases energy, and any positive action uses and consumes energy. Thus, for the last pendulum swing period, life was going through a negative time, and energy was returned to its source. And from now onwards, for an equally long period of time, energy will pour into the galaxy, reinvigorating all life. The batteries, if we were to use this term, if we are to use this term, are fully charged thanks to the negative intentions of the archons and their deluded minions, and huge amounts of this energy are poised, awaiting the turning of the switch that will release this energy. However, to continue with this electrical analogy, the energy must be released slowly in a controlled fashion, or its supreme and overwhelming power would cause a fuse to blow. We apologize for using the simple electrical analogy to describe events taking place, but if it allows you to understand the concept of using and replacing energy, it will have served its purpose. So we are firmly on course for positive energy to be received. Its effects will be scarcely its effects will be scarcely be noticeable at first. Its effects will scarcely be noticeable at first, but as the switch is opened more over time and more of the spiritual energy is released, so the effects will become more visible. I apologize for the odd typo that's in the chapters. We indeed live in blessed times. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry, something's happening here with my screen just locked up. There we go. It is thanks to all the suffering by so many people and animals for so long that we're actually returning energy to the God source through actions created by the archonic forces, that we can now benefit from that suffering as we move into the light. We must be grateful to our ancestors who gave so much so that we can reap the harvest of their labor. Very true. As time does not really exist and all is now, if we are able to realize that difficult to understand concept, we can quite literally link with those people who went through those difficult times. And if we reach out mentally, we can share the lives that those people lived. We can partake in the suffering, both mental and physical, that was imposed on them. Depending on the age we return to and the country we select to observe, we can visualize events of a brutality and cruelty that would be scarcely imaginable in this day and age. This degree of suffering was brought about also because of the position of the galaxy in regard to what is termed by some as the central sun, which is not actually a correct appellation. There is no central sun, but what there is a positioning of the galaxy in or out of alignment of a dynamic spiritual force that does, indeed, shine throughout creation, either illuminating the astral realms or leaving them in shadow, depending on the relative position of our galaxy with regard to this light. Until recently, we were moving through the shadow part of this created light. Indeed, as this light is the spiritual light of the God force, lack of this light illuminating the souls of man led to what we might term the night of life, a time when positive spirituality was almost absent. Thus, as the mind of man, as always active, probably should be is always active, and desirous of researching movement and progress, if man is not influenced by a positive light from God, it nevertheless searches for things to do and invent, and with the aid of the archons, terrible things were created to satisfy the desire to bring progress into reality. It must be appreciated that when life was passing through the nadir, the point that was directly opposite to maximum brightness that will eventually be experienced, man was, from a spiritual point of view, in Stygian darkness, and so negative thoughts were first and foremost in the minds of man, and so terrible things came into being, the creations of man cut off from any spirituality. These acts, that would be hard for us to imagine, and certainly would not be accepted today, were considered normal, and so many suffered terribly. However, life was short at that time, and so the suffering was equally short lived. We must appreciate that the actions taken by what we would today consider to be evil people were not considered so. The opposite of holy is evil. But if people are living in a world of spiritual darkness, they can only receive negative thoughts and therefore take negative actions. There was no other choice at that time. As has been mentioned, change is the only constant. So, slowly, the galaxy, in a spiritual sense, moved back into the light. Thus, there are two factions, two reactions that the change from darkness to light engenders. The archons, and those that have actively worked for them, are distinctly shocked by this change. Being negative in orientation and having been in control of the planet for so long, they could not conceive of any change occurring. Further, because they dwell exclusively in the lower astral forms of life, they have no concept of the overall picture. They do not have any knowledge of the way the great pendulum of life swings back and forth over vast periods of time. And so, the world in which they live, they thought, was the only one possible. It must be also said that no angelic beings bother to interact with archons because they know that this group of entities have no concept of holiness, and, as a result of cutting themselves off from the light, living in a dark world, they, in all probability, would not be able to perceive shining angelic beings and certainly would not understand what they are and from what dimension they come. Thus, as the move towards the light becomes more obvious, the effect on the archons is confusion and fear. Archons like to create fear in others, but for the first time, they are creating fear in themselves, a strange sensation for them, the biter bit. I wonder if that should say the bitter bit. As was mentioned earlier, their destiny, ultimately, is to be isolated in their dark world, as the light from God illuminates all corners of the world, astral as well as physical. And these creatures retreat further and further from the light in an attempt to find a small, dark corner in which to cower. Despite all the despite all the harm for which they have been responsible, it is not our intention to harm the archons. They, unfortunately, were a necessary part of the cycle of life. As was mentioned, life used their negativity to return spiritual energy back to the Godhead, and it is thanks to their negativity that the positive forces can come into action. So, we do not see the archons as an enemy. They were a necessary part of the pendulum swing of life, but we have no further need for them. Their time is over. Now is the time for godliness and light. We mentioned that there are two reactions to the influx of light. One was the archon reaction, fear and cowering in a corner, and the other is those beings that look forward to bathing in the light of God. We include in this group not only those who already have an elevated consciousness, but also what we might term common or garden types of people. Ordinary. Those who have no particular propensity for spirituality nor for causing harm. This group, we suggest, would be the major part of the population of Earth, ordinary people. This group also will feel great confusion as the light from God illuminates their auras and great changes to their emotions will occur. This group, who, for so long, had been under the archon control, will feel the emotion of release from this control, and for the first time in many millennia, will start to feel joy. Joy is a word that has almost no meaning among the population of Earth. Whatever form of happiness experienced on Earth, there is always an element of fear remaining in the background. So ingrained in this is this element of constant fear that it would, at the moment, be almost impossible for the average person to release it and live in a state of pure joy, pure bliss. Indeed, it is not quite the time yet to release all fear. Fear is part of the flight/fight protection that keeps people safe from invasion by the negative forces circulating in the etheric realms. Eventually, as has been said, these forces will be swept away by the light of God, penetrating every corner of God's empire and flooding every aspect of life in all the dimensions with spiritual light. Now, the question is, what action can we, who are more aware of spiritual progress, take to help the average person and guide them in realizing that these changes are not only inevitable, but positive, and so nothing to fear, but indeed something to welcome? Unfortunately, we have no right to impose ourselves on others. Therefore, we must wait patiently until they come to us, having noticed a difference between them and us, and having the desire to become more like us. Then, and only then, can we take them under our wing and explain what is going on and guide them along the path to this newfound freedom, freedom from fear. We look forward to the day when all the people of the planet are filled with joy all the time. That day is coming and is closer than you think. The time for misery and despair is over, but it is only so in the degree that people can free themselves from the old, ingrained notion that evil is always lurking, ready to pounce on anyone unfortunate enough to lower their guard for a moment. Whilst it is true that the time of complete freedom from evil is not yet come, nevertheless, there is no need to be fearful. Evil acts and evil thoughts are being swept away by this spiritual light that is flooding the astral, etheric, and physical dimensions. As has been mentioned, one can compare light and darkness, both spiritual like physical. There is a similar effect. All light, even the smallest glimmer, will cause darkness and reveal it for what it was, pure illusion. Darkness can only exist in the absence of light, and as light is everywhere now, albeit not yet at full strength, it is pushing darkness away. So, we have a choice either to live in the light or to accept that to live in the shadows is more familiar and feels safer, and so to continue to live in shadow. Only a fool, when given the option of freedom by living in light compared to slavery by being entrapped in darkness, but it takes a certain courage to step from the relative safety of darkness and being revealed in the light. Many have taken advantage of darkness by presenting themselves as one thing whilst being another. Many have prospered by fooling those who also lived in the shadow of a false identity. Politicians, bankers, business people, and many church leaders have lived like this for long ages, pretending to be kind, considerate, and benevolent people, whilst, in reality, they were egocentric beings solely concentrating on promoting their own interests. This attitude can only work in darkness. This darkness, being of a spiritual nature, is capable of manipulation. It is only when people are living in spiritual darkness can lies and deceptions be perpetrated on gullible people. Thus, many are reluctant to step into light, both perpetrators and victims. Once the step into spiritual light is taken, everything changes. Lies and deceptions are seen for what they are. There's no place for hidden agendas, hidden programs, or hidden motives. Honesty is seen for what it is, and falsehood immediately unmasked. This, of course, applies to all people. We might be glad if any businessman or religious leader who told us falsehoods was unmasked, but how many of us could stand in the same light and be revealed also? How many of us could accept that we could never again tell a falsehood, express an opinion that was not totally honest, or have a thought about profiting from someone? For this is what standing in the light means: our souls, our deepest thoughts, our darkest secrets. Those that we would prefer to take to the grave with us would be revealed to all. It must be said that once a person's incarnation is terminated and the person moves on to what is called heaven, his soul will be naked for all to see anyway. But it is easier to accept that event happened in what is hoped will be a distant future on a different plane of existence than it occurring now at this moment. But to stand in God's light means exactly that. It was mentioned that lies and treachery can only exist when hidden by darkness. To stand in spiritual light automatically reveals our life, both positive and negative. When this occurs in the heavenly spheres, we term it the life review, one's whole life exposed to one and all. This is exactly what will happen here on earth when one truly steps into the light. In effect, it is stripping back to its foundation the life lived by someone and then starting again, making a fresh start. That, of course, was the purpose of confession, used in some religions, but, as is so often the case, it was corrupted and made non effective. It must be said that, years ago, for those living in shadow with no light to step into, it was rather pointless. Today, however, it is, or will be soon, possible. Eventually, as years pass and more light comes to us, it will be inevitable. The way this will happen is as follows. Man, indeed all sentient life, is complex and multi-layered, multi-dimensional. People living in physical life consider that the only means of communication is by physical means. We speak using our voice or by writing. Thus, our thoughts are expressed through physical means, or rather, the thoughts that we wish to communicate are expressed by those means. This enables, if we so desire, to have a hidden layer of thoughts that we either keep to ourselves or express solely to the few that we choose to be partners in crime. However, there is a means of communication that is called telepathy, which essentially is enabled by two or more people reaching out with their auras and passing through them and passing thoughts to them. The thought passes from one mind into an aura, is picked up by the other aura of another person, and that information passes into the mind of the recipient. Okay, this is a point where I'm going to stop here for part one, and I'll start part two of the video, and I'll see you in the second half of this video. Thank you for watching. Welcome back, everyone. We now continue on with part two of chapter 4, and we pick up from where we left off. That is the most basic form of nonverbal communication and is, in fact, very close to what is used by speech. In the case of speech, sound waves are used from the voice box of one person into the ear of a second, but sound is just a vibration. In the case of telepathy, it is also vibration that is used, but more closely resembles wireless telephones that exist today. However, when dealing with auras, we have more than one aura. In fact, we have 7, and each one of these auras can be used to pass and receive information. Each one is of a higher vibration, and each one requires a higher degree of spirituality in order to be able to pass information from and to. It requires both the sender and the receiver to be at a similar stage of advancement before the higher auras can come into play. The basic level of telepathy requires a certain level of spirituality before communication can work effectively. But communication via the higher auras requires ever rising levels of spirituality before it can work. Now, the reason telepathy was mentioned was because that is the key to seeing the truth, or otherwise, in someone's statements. For people who do not have sufficient spirituality to develop telepathy, or have not learned how to communicate in this fashion, they are limited to just listening to the words spoken and analyzing what the person is saying, or, equally, observing body language in order to try to comprehend if it is truth or lies that are being spoken. For the person who has developed telepathy, in addition to the words spoken, the body language used, the observer can receive information telepathically. For all people, as they are thinking and speaking, are sending thought information into their auras. Not only the words they wish to share with others, but some of their true thoughts coming from their minds. Thus is the person trained in Thus is the person trained in simple telepathy able to discern the truth behind the spoken words. The words spoken. Sorry. The point being made is that if someone has developed spirituality to the point where he can operate in his higher auras, he will instantly pick up information contained in the speaker's higher auras and instantly perceive truth or lies. For do not suppose that the higher auras contain only high levels of spirituality. All people are constantly broadcasting using all of their auras, and a trained person is able to read those auras clearly and precisely, and thus understand just what the speaker is really thinking and not just what he is saying. Thus, in the near future, when enough people have been bathed in God's power coming from earth and have developed through prayer, meditation, and service to God, service to all life, their higher auras, they will not only be able to communicate telepathically, but will also understand any hidden thoughts. Then there can be no secrets. All will be revealed to those capable of receiving auric information. It is not everyone who is prepared at the moment to appear naked in a spiritual sense, because for so long has duplicity been considered to be the norm, and we all have skeletons in our cupboards, secrets that we would prefer to keep private, but, as was mentioned, we cannot progress along the spiritual path to God and spiritual freedom while we are dragging dark secrets along with us. We must be free and spiritually clean to continue along the path to God. This is the way that the future world will unfold. No more dark secrets. Thus, will the people of earth see how their so-called elders and betters have been systematically robbing them in many domains for long ages. How vast fortunes are taken from the labors of gullible workers without a second thought for the privations imposed on workers, while this upper class amassed enormous wealth through imposing harsh taxes on hard-working masses. This system, of course, goes on to this day, and few workers question why they have to pay taxes on their labors, why they have to pay taxes on the right to live somewhere, why they are taxed for every drop of water they drink and every mouthful of food they eat. In many countries, both birth and burial are also taxed. If one was to calculate the huge amount of money collected and compare that with the amount actually spent on keeping the infrastructure of life going, one would notice a large difference. Vast amounts of money just disappear from the coffers each year. Some of this money, indeed a lot of it, is siphoned off to keep the rich in the lifestyle to which they have been accustomed for so long and that they consider to be their due rewards for serving and guiding the lower classes. This unfair system of robbing the poor to feed the rich will be exposed. Indeed, it has already started. People will be encouraged to work for the pleasure of serving the God force present in their fellow man, and their just reward for serving God will be the wages they receive. Then, most of that money will be retained by them to help feed their families. In the meantime, those who have been robbing the workers will be exposed and expelled, to be replaced by honest directors of a country. A different system of rewarding work will be introduced. People will be paid according to their worth to the community and not their status. Then, for instance, those who go around collecting the rubbish of others in all weathers, variously known as trashmen or dustmen, will be seen to be of more service to the community than someone sitting in an air-conditioned office creating unnecessary laws. The rubbish collectors will be suitably rewarded for the service that they render to the community. Mention must be also made of alternative energies. A variety of alternative energy sources have been known about for a long time, but have been suppressed from the public in order to keep the rich at the expense of terrible damage to planet Earth. This must and will change. People need energy in order to heat their houses, cook their food, and displace themselves. But it is no longer acceptable to rape the earth of its lifeblood in order to do this. This crime must cease. There are, as was mentioned, a number of alternative sources of non polluting, non negative energies that will become available. This will, in all probability, start with what are referred to as over unity devices that, quite simply, take the energy available in the galaxy and convert it into electricity. Then there will be a variety of energies introduced, bit by bit, as spirituality progresses until the glorious day when pure spiritual energy will be used as a power source. It will, in effect, be using the light force from God to power machines. This God force is, of course, already seen in action every time we look around us. It is the God force that we see giving life to all things, and this force can be tapped in a positive, controlled means to drive the wheels of man's industry. But discovering the means of using the God force requires also that man be much more spiritually advanced than he is at the moment. Power sources can only be discovered in the degree that man is evolved. That is why it has taken so long to move from using beasts of burden to assist man through using steam, coal, and now oil to move soon into primitive but effective over unity machines. So you can see one's hopes that to use pure God's power to fuel machines is a long way in Earth's future. However, let it be noted that all these proposed fuels that do not use gas, coal, oil, or even sunlight or wind will be virtually free. They will be freely available and thus must be commercialized for virtually nothing. Once the investment to create the machines and the infrastructure of distribution recuperated, the actual fuel is free, given by the cosmos itself. The first machines of this type have already existed for some time but have been kept secret, only available to the lucky few. Shortly, this type of virtually free energy will be available to all and will change the world. Perhaps one should also mention that man himself is capable, when sufficiently developed, to perform certain acts that, at the moment, require machines of various types. For instance, if a person wishes to speak to someone a long distance away, where direct speech is not possible, he requires a telephone of some kind. Sound being converted to electrical vibrations, which will alternatively be picked up by another device and converted back to sound. However, this requires electrical energy, the use of satellites, and is both expensive and destructive of the planet, as the source of that electrical energy is either oil or nuclear fuel. But telepathy could easily be developed by people. The reason that it has not been taught are many. Telepathy not only enables one person to communicate with another, but enables that person, to a certain extent, to discern the motives behind the spoken word, as was previously mentioned. The negative beings that have for so long controlled and enslaved humanity certainly do not wish their true, dark motives to be revealed, so they teach instead that telepathy is nonsense and is not possible to do. Another reason for not teaching telepathy is because it would open the door to questioning how it functions. This would lead to the discovery of auras, and so, eventually, the whole of accepted science would be brought into question, and man would realize that he has been lied to concerning the origins of life, the makeup of life, and the place of God in this maze. The controllers of man certainly do not want mankind to wake up and question what they have been taught, so telepathy remains a myth. One could also talk about the economic effects of if mobile telephones were no longer required, but we have said enough. Telepathy is totally possible to learn, and we hope that soon it will be taught. There is one other topic that we could mention that seems myth at the moment, and that is teleportation. It may seem a dream to many, but it is actually quite possible for man incarnate to transport himself by thought. It is the means that is used once man's incarnation is finished and he no longer has a physical body to hamper him. However, as all is vibration, it is quite possible to manipulate the vibration, not only of the spiritual bodies, the auras, but also the physical body, because that is nothing more than an aura also. Once man develops his spirituality, not only to fill his auras with spiritual power, but, by the same token, it is possible to take spiritual control of what is termed the physical body. Should this be achieved, then all that is needed is for someone to desire to displace himself from one spot to another, and he moves to that desired spot instantly. It is not a question of traveling from one place to another, but displacing oneself instantly to a desired location. Now, it is not something that can be learned by desire, the wish to move, but it is a question of spiritual development. This could be accomplished by anyone now, but in all probability will be for future generations, who will be more influenced by the light illuminating all of his bodies, auric, etheric, and physical, and thus enabling someone to develop spirituality more easily. Thus, should teleportation be developed, the use of a vehicle would not be required. However, like all these skills, they would apply exclusively to the person concerned, and thus teleportation cannot be used to transport others. Each and every person who wishes to transport themselves by teleportation must, themselves, develop the skill. Equally, there is a limit to what can be transported with the person. As everything is alive, an object must develop the ability to teleport or they would be left behind. It is possible for someone to overpower a small inanimate object that has very little life force so that it becomes, for that moment, under the influence of the person. But a large object or animal, for instance, could not accompany anyone. Therefore, the use of teleportation is rather limited. Nevertheless, Nevertheless, it will become a method of personal transport in the future. So, we will be able to communicate using telepathy, and we will be able to displace ourselves using teleportation. There will be other skills that can be developed also. The ability to see objects or people in the dark will become possible. The ability to move forwards and backwards in time. This would be possible because time does not exist as it is imagined today. All things are occurring in what we might term the now moment. So it will be a question of moving from one now moment to another. Once again, we must qualify this statement by saying that because it would be dangerous to time travel in case by accident or intention something was altered, which could affect the history of mankind, a protection exists in which the person actually travels to an alternative reality, a sort of recording of the events, either in the past or the future, and even if that recording is manipulated, it will not affect the real events. Thus, one can see that a magnificent future awaits man, a future where the slavery in which mankind lives at the moment will cease and peace, calm, and freedom from any form of fear will be introduced. This way of living was, of course, experienced a long time ago, the last time when the pendulum of time was in the bright period. Then, gradually, the pendulum swung towards the darkness. The lack of spiritual light, and earth was plunged into a long period of tenebrae. As was previously mentioned, the dark period is now finished, and the angels in heaven are singing in praise of the Lord and his light as well. And his light as we all, both humanity, the animals on earth, the planet herself, are once more bathed in the effulgent rays of pure God light. We might, perhaps, start to consider what happens to the opposite side of existence when we are in light. For instance, somewhere else is in darkness and vice versa. We might question if there is any life on the other side of existence. We can almost be sure that there is life everywhere. So, can we have any notion if there is life on the other side and what life might look like and how it operates? We can say with certainty that vast distance from us, that incredible dimension that separates us from anything else there is, never sorry, let me read that again. We can say with certainty that vast distance from us, that incredible dimension that separates us from anything else there is, nevertheless, life. This life is scarcely known to us because it is so far from us and lives by rules so far removed from anything that we are familiar with that it would be difficult for us to make any intelligent comment. But we can say that there is life. God's light always shines on some form of God's creation. God created any forms of life in his endeavor to gain experience, and the life we see here on earth, in the etheric, and the spiritual realms are only a small fraction of God's creations. God never wastes his energy, so we can rest assured that whatever these life forms look like, whatever experiences they are subject to, they must, like us, go through the pendulum swing from light to dark. If we are moving into the light, this other area must be moving into darkness, and our hearts go out to them, and we pray that they have the courage and strength to withstand the rigors that a long period of darkness will impose on them. But we come out of the winter of life into God's light, so we rejoice. We look forward to life unfolding much as we have predicted, man, animals, and planet Earth all starting to shine with God's power. We know approximately what will occur thanks to the recollections of the wonderful, wise people who lived that last light period and recounted events to us. We are a long way from the maximum point of freedom from Archon slavery, but each and every day draws us further into the light. Each and every day that draws us closer to the elimination of Archon control and will bring us, eventually, into a period that no one incarnate at the moment could imagine. Love for all, love for oneself, freedom from any form of fear. Amazing forms of energy released into our grasp, eliminating any form of poverty, and by the same token, eliminating any need for war, migrations, and jealousy between the haves and the have-nots. We will all have equally. We will all have equally. This and more is the destiny of man as we progress through the light-filled millennia. Peace and total freedom for all. Certainly sounds wonderful. Okay, I stop here at the end of chapter 4. And if you have any questions about chapter 4 or any of the other previous chapters, or any just questions in general, please leave them under the video and I will be more than happy to answer them for you. And that's it for this video, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching this video. Please visit our website at thegreatwhitebrotherhood.org for free books and lessons to help you on your spiritual journey.